Should be good.
So anyway, they rushed me off to the hospital, and I got my stomach pumped and all that neat stuff. And that was when I was 13. And I wish I could say that was the first time I'd ever, drank or anything like that, but it wasn't. And anyway, so all the way through high school, what we did socially was we partied, every weekend. Every time we went to a football game, every time we went to a dance, we'd get together, play cards, drink. We'd go to keggers and all this stuff. And during the week, we were involved in school stuff, in sports and all that. But everybody I was around, we partied, and we partied hard every Saturday, all the way through high school. Well, towards the end of high school, we even started, occasionally we'd smoke pot and stuff like that when we'd be partying, But mainly it was just a social thing, and we'd just get out and just drink, and blackout drunk. And but when we graduated from high school, things kind of took a darker turn for me. A friend of mine, his brother, stole a bunch of marijuana from some guy in California out of a trailer. And he got scared or whatever, so he gave it to my friend, And so we thought road trip, we're graduated, and we headed for somebody had told us that down in San Francisco, if you go to the gay part of town, Mission Street, Castro Street, the cops wouldn't bug you, and there's all kinds of drugs, and you can sell your pot, So we headed out, and we went down there, and we sold that pot. And so now we're partying every day. We got unlimited pot and all that. So we're smoking all day, and we party at night. But on the way down there, I had no brakes, And so when we're driving down to San Francisco, I couldn't wait to try cocaine. I thought, yeah, coke, man. I was ready to party, and just no brakes whatsoever. Just go full steam ahead. And so we did. We started doing a little bit of coke. What we'd do is we'd smoke pot during the day, and it was kind of mellow. And then at night, every night, we'd go to a different party at a different place, And now we got coke there too. And so we're kind of getting involved with that and drinking and partying, but it's still social. I wouldn't do that at home by myself. I'd smoke pot, but I wouldn't do that. Well, anyway, as you can imagine, it didn't take long and the money ran out, living like that. So when the money ran out, I don't even really know how long it was. It wasn't a whole long time, a few months probably. And we came home, and I got a job at Roseburg Lumber. And Roseburg Lumber in those days isn't like it is now. There was no drug testing or anything like that. We did drugs on the job. Every break we would go and smoke pot, and it was a whole different world, And some guy came up and he offered me this little line of drugs. I didn't have a clue what it was. He said, "Here, man, try this," and it was meth. I didn't even know what it was, and I did that. And the first time I did that, I was addicted. It was fun, And for the next 5 years, I was high. Okay, it was. Like I say, I didn't have any idea what it was, but I did that, and I knew, man, I want to do that all the time, And so instead of like walking you through the progression of the next 5 years, I'll just tell you where I ended up. Okay, towards the end there, I stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was a party house, you know, a bunch of guys, and it was dirty. It was just drug paraphernalia, you know, bongs and all kinds of junk and cans, and I mean, I had a little foam mat that I would roll up with a dirty sleeping bag on it, and I would put it away, and then I'd drag it out when I was there, which wasn't very often. It was only a few days a week. Drag it out and spread it on the floor, and that's where I slept, you know. By now, I don't know if you guys know much about meth. Hopefully most of you don't, but it's an evil drug, man. It is evil, and it, you know, anybody that's done it knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, so after a few years of this, I began to, I mean, I was out of my mind, you know, as you guys can imagine. You know that guy that everybody sees coming, and they all like try and avoid him because they don't want him talking to him because he just rattles on, and he's just off his rocker, you know. That's who I was. Right? And I mean, the ladies gather their kids and rush off. People would avoid you like the plague, you know, because they can't get rid of you, you know, and you're just, anyway, I'd really lost it. And I'm to give you an example, one time I met my brother in the Roseburg Valley Mall. And I guess he came up and talked to me and stuff. I didn't even know who he was. He told me about that years later. I had no clue who he was, my own brother. Okay? Sorry. So anyway, about that time though, I mean I was really out of it. You know, I knew I was a mess now. I was ready to change. And a friend of mine, one of my old drinking buddies from high school, he talked me into calling a drug rehab. I think it was called Gateways. And so I was ready. I called and I went, and for a month I was in this drug rehab, which was, you stayed there. So for a month I didn't have anything, no drugs, nothing bad for me. And so everything's fine, right? I get out, and I rented a room in a farmhouse out in Winston, a little upstairs room in this farmhouse with some old friends, and everything's great, but everything wasn't great, you know. And on the last night there, well, first of all, Jesus, he said, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the path that leads to destruction, and there are many that go through that gate. But narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few that find it. Well, on that last night, after drug rehab, I went out to a bar for the first time since I was clean for a month, you know, which I'd never been clean for a month, and went out to a bar, ran into friends, smoked a little pot, ended up with some woman, I have no idea, some bar woman, I have no idea who she was or anything like that. And later that night, I got back to my room, or later that morning probably, I got back to my room, and I was laying there, and I realized, you know, that even though I'd cleaned up the outside, I was still a mess. And it was just starting to come out. And anyway, I was laying there in bed, and I believe it was a supernatural thing. But all of a sudden, I had all this regret, and I could see all my sin and how I'd squandered my life, right? I'd been given a lot, and I just had thrown it away. And it was more than that. It was like well, anyway, it was more than I could bear. And I was laying there on my bed, and just this regret and sorrow and realization that I'd wasted my life, and the damage I'd done to my brain was not going to go away. Because I'd cleaned up the outside, but the inside was still a mess. What's that? There's a saying, at the heart of the human condition is the condition of the human heart. You know, you can clean up the outside of the cup, but you're still on the wrong path. Anyway, so I'm laying there in my bed, and this I don't know what an anxiety attack is really, but this is probably what it was like. But I'm just grabbing my sheets, and I'm sweating, and this is more than I can handle, and this noise is in my head. And all this regret, and my whole life is like flashing before my eyes, how I'd thrown it away and how I was never going to be the same. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm grabbing my sheets, and sweat's just pouring off me. And somewhere about then I sensed a presence in my room, like somebody's in my room. But I was in too much anguish to really focus on it and figure out who it was or anything. I didn't care. And I'm just laying there. I can't handle it much longer. I mean, I know I'm thinking I'm going to die, right? And I'm laying there and I'm sweating and I'm grabbing my sheets and this noise in my head is just ever increasing. And all of a sudden, I'm given this vision of a picture, a painting, like a painting of Jesus. Probably one I'd seen in my grandparents' house or something. You know, it was obviously a painting, one everybody here would recognize as Jesus. And this painting just came in my, I don't know if my eyes were closed or open, but I had this vision of a picture of a painting of Jesus. And the presence that was in my room just filled my room, right? And it wasn't a scary presence, but I was still kind of in anguish, and I was seeing this picture. And the presence just kind of like manifested itself in my room. And I'm seeing this picture, and it's given to me as a question. It's not just a picture, but it's like a book of information. You know, and it went something like this. It went something like, Bill, this is your chance. You're standing at the crossroads. Choose. Just like that. So anyway, and at the same time, so I'm thinking, in my mind, all of a sudden, I have a whole flood of thoughts, you know, and I'm thinking, this is the deal of a lifetime. This is a deal, man. You know, take it. And I just blurted out. I blurted out one word, just Jesus, like that. And I imagine I really blurted it out, you know. And as soon as I blurted out the name of Jesus, I chose. That's the path I chose. And I stepped through that narrow gate, right? And this peace, just the presence just really filled my room. And this peace, just as thick as molasses, you know, like warm oil, just started flowing down over me. And I just melted back into my bed, and I fell asleep. Okay? The next morning I get up, and I was changed. You know, when I went down the stairs, the very core of who I was different. And I'm speaking with 25 years of hindsight, and I'm changed today. I'm still the new creature. You know, the old person had died. Before, when I was in sin, when I would sin or something would tempt me or anything like that, I had no choice. You know, that was my nature. I was a sinner. And it was my nature. But after that day, whenever I would be faced with a temptation, and I have been faced with temptations, and I've sinned and all that in the last 25 years, but now it goes against my nature. You know, and yeah, so it was radical. Yeah, it was. And I mean, my friends, I blew them away. You know, I got out of that house that day. I mean, I left that whole life. I left everything, and I walked away. You know, I'm kind of reminded. You know, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now he's just a couple hours away from being crucified, right? And he's in such anguish. He knows what's going to happen, right? And he just collapses, and he just prays. He prays to the Father. He prays, Lord, Father, you know, take this cup. Take this cup from me. If there's any other way, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And he did that 3 times, and he just absolutely poured out his heart to the Father. Now, and that tells me a couple things. First of all, that tells me that God loves me. You know, he is absolutely, he loves me more than we can imagine, you know, but he loved me. He didn't first love me as a 55-year-old dad and husband and all this stuff. He loved me when I was a 27-year-old drug addict passed out in a field. That's when he first loved me. But the point I want to make with you guys is what that really tells me is there's only one way. There's only one narrow gate, right? I mean, God didn't take the cup away from him because there was no other way that a sinful man like me could be saved. So anyway, so thank you. I'll just leave it there.